Hello, so this video will cover most of what you need to know regarding Bedman's 8-way air dash. In particular, I want to cover the mechanics of his 8-way air dash, some tricks on how to use it, his air normals in conjunction with his air dash, and some overall strategy on using air dashes in a neutral game. Let's begin. Bedman's 8-way air dash. Bedman is unique in that he does not have a traditional air dash or a double jump. Bedman instead carries an 8-way air dash. When Bedman attempts a dash in the air, he will instead enter a mandatory hover state. The next direction you hold after is where Bedman dashes towards to. Simple as that. Now, getting the most important part out of the way first, use a dash macro. Some characters can afford not to use one, but Bedman is one where you really want to use one, and you're severely handicapping yourself by not doing so. The manual input to do an air dash forward would be double tapping forward and then tapping forward a third time after. Now, if you're using the dash macro, it's as easy as pressing the dash macro and holding forward after. Never make things more difficult for yourself. Use the dash macro. Now, let me cover some important rules and mechanics of his air dash. 1. Bedman's air dash is unique in that the actual moving portion of his air dash is not punishable. Bedman can immediately block and tech throws when he begins air dashing. The part that is vulnerable, however, is when he enters the hover state. Bedman in the hover state cannot block or tech throw, so be very aware about that. 2. Bedman can hold his hover state and stall in the air. He does not need to immediately air dash. The reason why you would want to do this is to bait reactions out of the opponent and have them whip their anti-airs. 3. Bedman's air dash momentum can be cancelled. This isn't unique to Bedman's air dash. Every character that has an air dash has a bit of drag at the end of the air dash. By cancelling your air dash momentum, you essentially fast fall from the air dash. In this example, you see that Bedman kind of hangs in the air at the end of his air dash. Now, if I cancel his air dash though, he seems to fall faster and his overall arc in the air is different. You can cancel your air dash to almost anything. Any button works, such as JP or JH. One option is to cancel into faultless defense. This allows you to air dash forward and get a lower hitting JS than you would be able to otherwise. This is also very crucial in landing empty air dashes low. When trying to do the tricky air dash empty low, the residual hang time of the air dash can ruin everything as it makes it very slow. The easy way to resolve this is to do the JH immediately after air dashing downwards. JH is slow enough to where it never comes out because you land too soon, but that's fine. We just want the air dash momentum of the cancel and not the actual JH. As a result, you can get the 2K out pretty quickly. You can also FD break if you have the execution to do so and block potential mashes as you fall in some ways that you can't do when doing JH, but this input starts to become very complex and highly prone to miss inputs if you're sloppy. 4. Bedman can air dash after doing his call specials in the air. Both the manual cash out and the timer reset are fairly fast moves that recover quickly and allows Bedman to act after. If Bedman already air dashed prior to using these specials, then they will not reset his air options. What can reset his air options is blocking something in the air, but this situation comes very infrequently to the point where it's not really worth mentioning. Usually you can only do this when blocking projectiles. 5. Bedman can air dash cancel every single one of his air normal attacks, JP, JK, JS, JH, and JD. Doing so is simple. Land the move, be it on block or hit, and press the dash macro. Bedman will cancel his connected attack into the hover state in which you can issue the follow-ups after. 6. And the final tip, but this one's actually very important to know. Bedman has a minimum height where he can enter hover state. If you super jump, however, you reach this minimum height faster about 1 or 2 frames. Now you may be wondering, what's the big deal to save that kind of time? It's just only 1 or 2 frames, but there are some very important factors to why you may want to do this. Let me present an example. Let's say I hit 2H spin on Leo, and he's in the corner now. Leo is famous for his flash kick attack. I have a great option that can protect myself on the flash kick while continuing my offense, and that is a safe jump. I normal jump, hover as fast as possible, air dash down forward with JK as soon as possible, and this ends up being his 9-frame reversal like his flash kick. Now if he doesn't flash kick, my JK just hits him or makes him block, and I route my sequence normally. Now for the second example, I hit 2K into 2D into spin. I tried the same safe jump with a normal jump, air dash down forward, JK. This time, I got hit. What gives? The main issue is the time that I have after spin. It's arbitrary to what I juggle from it. 2H can pop Leo upwards before the spin, giving me more time to work with, but 2K 2D spin has a lower altitude juggle. To make up for the lost time, there are 2 adjustments I need to make. First, I need to super jump to reach the minimum height to air dash just a bit faster. Second, I air dash immediately down with JK now as opposed to down forward to reach the ground even faster. With those 2 adjustments, I can now safe jump 9-frame reversals even if I just hit raw spin. Keep that in mind. Safe jumps are the easiest way to implement this fast air dash in a meaningful way, but in neutral, it may be worth practicing super jumps for faster air dashes in a neutral game should you ever commit to them. Bedman's air normals. I'll now cover all of Bedman's air normals. I'll mostly talk about their main usages and how to increase their utility with the air dashes. JB. JP is Bedman's bread and butter air-to-air. While some JPs are forgettable normals for some characters, it's a very crucial air-to-air for Bedman. It's fast enough to air-to-air things on reaction or to do it preemptively. JP is fairly low commitment, but you have to be ready to block in case you guess wrong, otherwise it isn't low commitment anymore. On air-to-air hits, gauge the height of the opponent relative to Bedman. If they are even height or higher than you and aren't super far away, air spin is a solid ender. If you don't eyeball this correctly, spin can potentially whiff, resulting in them punishing you on your attempted confirm, and that really sucks. On air-to-air blocks, JP still shows some incredible utility. JP can drag them down slowly while cranking up their risk gauge. Before they land, you can air dash cancel into a forward air dash into JH. The reason why this is hard to contest for them is that when you make the enemy block something and they land while blocking, that block stun carries over into landing recovery. Through this sequence, your air-to-air is still remarkably rewarding even if it doesn't hit. Rapid fire JPs on airborne opponents also makes for a great way to stall opponents for an error to come out. If you anticipate that they may jump out after blocking a level 1 malfunction, you can jail them with a stream of JPs. In some scrambly situations, you can use JP as an overhead and combine it with air dashes as well. Timing a JP right before you land allows you to properly link to a close slash or 2K. JK. JK is Bedman's fastest air-to-ground normal. This is one of the options that Bedman has to save jump with. It has less pushback than JS, making it more resistant to flawless defense than JS. JK doesn't seem all too great at first, but it is a very useful normal. In the situations where you cross up the opponent, a late JK is good to check him. A simple example is off of throat. You can micro dash forward, let a forward air dash hang, and cross up with a late JK. In a lot of situations where you use Bedman's air dash to escape the corner, throwing a JK out can throw off the opponent. When using JK, you almost always want to use it when you're about to land. JK's cancel routes are very limited and also weak, so hitting JK too high up can result in some really chaotic scrambles. JK can be used as an air-to-air as it covers an area in front of Bedman, and it's easier to hit confirm off of with air dashes than JP, but JK's long recovery makes this a very risky option. JS. JS is Bedman's farthest reaching air normal. It goes quite far, almost feeling similar to Faust's JH in some ways. This is your primary poke, and when combined with air dashes, it can be a very multi-purpose move. For starters, one of the best use of JS is with downwards air dashes. Bedman's far slash, 2S, and 2D are all decent pokes with good range, but have fairly long recovery times. In the case that you want something that's quite the opposite, downwards air dash JS is exactly that. The whole motion of a downwards JS is filled with vulnerabilities. You have your jump startup, then you have the brief moment that you rise from the ground, then you have the vulnerable hover state, and then after that, your air dash comes along with 10 frame startup of JS. This whole motion makes for a very slow attack, but there is a saving grace to doing this. First, Bedman is consistently moving around when this is occurring, and primarily because he is in the air, he will avoid most low pokes and even some far slashes as well. Second, Bedman has little to no recovery when doing JS like this because he's quickly falling downwards. It's almost like a jump in some ways. Third, because Bedman is fast falling with a normal, it's actually pretty hard to hit him with 6Ps from far away. This is also helped by the fact that JS has a disjoint at the end of its tip. JS's impressive hitbox is further enhanced by the movement of his air dash, and you can create a wall of hitboxes in the brief moment that JS is active. It's a good way to control space and remain plus, but as mentioned earlier, do be careful as this entire sequence is very slow. If your opponent plays proactively with big normals, it's all too easy to just randomly get swatted out of the air. JS also does not have to be linked with an air dash to be effective. A normal jump isn't a huge commitment, and if you see the opponent meeting you in the air and doing something within JS range, it's pretty easy to just swat them out of the air with JS. On hit, you can air dash forward with another JS and go to spin if you're close enough. On counter hit, you can air dash forward with FT break and try to go for a low altitude JS to catch them with a 5K or close slash when you land. Lastly, JS is another option for Bedman to save jump with. It has more block stun than JK, so if you're scared about the opponent potentially throwing you after you fall down with a normal, JS is more reliable for that. JH. JH is Bedman's most active air normal, and this is likely going to be your moneymaker as far as air normals go. JH is the preferred jump in, or air dash in. JH is insanely active, having a buzzsaw just rotating in front of him that hits up to 6 times. The cool part about JH is that it doesn't always have to hit 6 times. The moment that Bedman lands, the move is over, obviously. So this ends up creating some pretty difficult to block situations. Falling with JH and immediately going to 2K is a pretty fast transition between a high and a low. If your opponent switches their guard too early, they may get hit by the final few hits of the JH before you land. If they switch their guard too late, the 2K catches their feet. JH becomes even more scary when mixed in with air dashes. Downwards air dashes with JHs are very tricky to block, and the air dash influences the timing of which the opponent has to switch their guard. JH also has the benefit of hitting pretty low, or at least is his lowest reaching air normal. This means that if the opponent is late with their 6p anti-air, they're likely to actually get counter hit. You may have encountered situations against Testament or Gold Lewis where their JH and JD respectively seems to sneak past your 6p and hit you. Bedman's JH is a little bit similar in that regard. Speaking of Gold Lewis, because Bedman's normal jump in is fairly heavy, you can use JH similar to how Gold Lewis uses JD at times. A forward jump with a difficulty anti-air normal can be an option to catch opponents off guard. If it hits and you're aligned correctly, you can just go into spin. If it hits too high up, you can air dash backwards and reset the situation, or moving forward if you're feeling greedy. JH's long active frames makes it also preferred for manual or auto time safe jumps. There'll be a lot of situations where after malfunction mid-screens, you won't have the luxury of an auto time safe jump. Building the skill to time a forward air dash JH as they rise up is a good skill to have. Generally, if you see that if you landed no more than the first 3 hits of JH, then your safe jump was a success. Any more and the timing might have been a little bit late. Speaking of deep or not deep, if you do a forward dash JH from a fairly tall height, you may be in an awkward position where it's not possible to land in time to link a landing normal. In that circumstance, going directly into spin is good enough. Otherwise, if you're actually in a good spot with JH to confirm the landing normal, then /2H spin is your go-to. JD. JD is Bedman's falling bed drop attack, and this move is weird to say the least. This is your most specialized normal and will see the least overall use. JD has Bedman temporarily rising before just falling to the ground. This move serves 2 main purposes. The first and perhaps best use of JD is that it's a mix-up tool. When you do JH into 2K, the opponent may be fixated on the switch block. Doing a JH and cancelling into JD can throw off their switch block timing. Do note that there's a minimum height where JD can be done. Attempting JD right before you're about to land with JH may result in you landing and doing 5D instead, which works at times, I guess. The JD cancel route is actually a lot stronger from JK, where the minimum height restriction is almost non-existent. Off of any air dash from a normal jump, you can always route from JK to JD, and this is already plenty tricky of its own. Think of the times where Zato's JK into JD has hit you. This is like a janky Bedman version of that. Now this mix-up is cool and all, but the issue lies with its reward and hit confirms. We don't have a little puppet character to make confirms easy for us, so we have to rely on errors, and auto-timing errors with this requires you to practice setups. Without errors, you're relying on one hit confirms into spin, and good luck with that. Another issue with JD is how often it ends up whipping when the opponent FDs the prior normal. JD is very easy to whip punish due to the cumbersome whip recovery that it has. JD can be used in another way, and it's when you cross up your opponent and are high above them, but because you don't have good vision of them, it's hard to tell what they're doing. When you get the hit, well, you get some damage, and you can jump cancel the JD into a jump to reset your air options while remaining plus. When you jump cancel JD from this and go to JH, there's little that will hit them as you are rising from the ground, so your go-to is usually just JH and air dash canceling that JH after, either into a defensive maneuver or an offensive one. Using JD in a neutral at all is a huge risk because JD's hitbox to hurtbox ratio is really weak. It's all too easy to be anti-aired, and not even intentionally anti-aired either. Close slashes or far slashes can easily just randomly hit you, and it goes without saying that if those 2 things can anti-air JD, so can 5Ps, 6Ps, and even 2Hs. JD is really gimmicky to say the least. If your opponent is asleep on the wheel, you could loop JHs and JDs, but anyone who begins to catch on will realize that all of this pressure can easily be beaten by just mashing 6P or 5P even. While you do have options to beat those, this is not the best way to play the risk reward game, but in the end, if it lands the hit into a knockdown, then who really cares? So some tips and tricks on using air dashes. The first, and perhaps the most important tip I have, is to never autopilot your air dashing. Bedman is not a fast character. If you ever played any kind of 8-way air dashing character, say from like Marvel vs. Capcom, or you came from Bedman's Xrd version, this Strive Bedman is going to be a major shakeup. You see, those characters can move. It's integral to their neutral in fact. Strive Bedman is kind of an anomaly in that regard. You have to use the air dashes in neutral to check the opponents in many ways, but Strive is a game where anti-airs are insane, to the point where far slashes or even Mega Fist is an anti-air at times. Air dashing is a very proactive movement, but strategically speaking, you're gaining little from the air dashes sometimes. When you get the whole air dash to come out with a normal, it's strong as hell. You have this moving disjoint like JS to check the opponent. But as mentioned earlier, the sequence to get that entire JS is highly prone to be hit by random things. A lot of my losses early on when playing Strive Bedman was because I became too fixated on proactive and autopilot movement. When you do an air dash, your idea of what it checks needs to be deliberate. First, ascertain the distance between you and your opponent. Any range where a rising air-to-air from the opponent can hit you is it already an area to be cautious about. This also applies to specialized anti-airs like Naga's 2H, Anji's Ko, or Bridge's 2H. To perhaps no one's surprise, this is very matchup dependent. Kai, Bike, and Amelia have fantastic JSs that can hit you as they are rising up, so against them, the range where you need to play air dashes become further. When you're at a safe distance, super jumping and going into the hover state is one of the many things you can do. This is where it's a good idea to hold the hover state and watch them. The reason you super jump is that you get slightly more height, which extends the threat range of your JH if you choose to do so. You can still fall down with JS or retreating JS to block some of their forward movement. The reason why you want to set up your air dash RPS further away is that so you can actually react. If they awkwardly run towards you and attempt to 6P thinking that you're going to air dash forward, then that's a potential whip punish with the air dash forward JH. If they maneuver towards you and attempt an air-to-air, you should be able to block in time or even use the destroying of JS to retreat backwards and snipe them. And of course, as mentioned earlier, if they just try to gain distance, air dash down JS can essentially establish a wall which they have to stop moving forward. You can take some gambles too, just by air dashing forward with JH or forward air dashing with FD break JS or JK if you feel that they will move towards that area. A lot of the idea of air dash is not exactly to force offense, but instead to bait out their reaction, gather information, and get a feel for how they like to play. This cannot be done if you consistently play proactively and just keep moving around like you're playing an actual fast character. This transitions to another topic where you need to be confident in your ground game as well. But this video is more about air dashes, so I'll talk about that in another video if I ever make it. Another tip, or rather something to keep in mind, is that all of Bedman's air normals are air dash cancelable, so it's easy to set up BRC situations by pressing the dash macro and RC. Because all of Bedman's air attacks are overhead, you can create some pretty simple fuzzy situations for the 50 meter that you opt to spend. Rising JK is your preferred normal to fuzzy with if you see that they're standing during the BRC frames. A third tip I have kind of pertains to my prior video about combining your air dashes with airs, especially the laser one. Laser is freaking good with air dash situations. When it's about to fire, it makes going in far safer. I can't tell you the amount of times that I was able to air dash forward, FD break, land, and just 2k 2d with the coverage of laser. Always play according to your errors if possible. I'd even argue it to be a good rule of thumb to avoid air dashing unless you have an error, but of course that's not always possible. The point being is that errors are really important to make air dash situations far better. Conclusion. Bedman in Strive is an oddity in that he's a heavyweight in a lot of ways. 5-frame jump, heavy jump arc, overall clunky movement, and a hurt box the size of Texas. Air dashing is crucial and you're going to use it in many ways. It'll be used for safe jumps, mix-ups, escaping the corner, and just for general poking in a neutral game. Bedman does have the means to be deceptively slippery, but that heavily hinges on how you opt to use it. If you ever get hit while air dashing, there has to be a fast lesson learned as to why you got hit and you need to internalize it. There's a lot of situations where it's almost never a good idea to air dash, so be confident in your ground game and in your projectiles. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.